Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was given the power cosmic by the Silver Surfer? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The salt in the air was an old wound. It mixed with the stench of decay and rust, a uniquely miserable perfume that clung to the heaps of discarded metal and forgotten appliances piled high on Dagoba Municipal Beach. The moon, a cold and indifferent silver disk, offered just enough light to trace the skeletal remains of refrigerators and the gnarled intestines of washing machines. To anyone else, it was a junkyard. To Izuku Midoriya, it was a mausoleum for his dream. He sat on a rusted-out car hood, the metal groaning under his slight weight. The sea breeze was sharp, but he barely felt its chill through the threadbare fabric of his school uniform. His attention was fixed on the object in his lap, a notebook, its cover a cheerful blue that felt like a mockery. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. Unlucky 13. The corner was blackened, the edges curled and brittle from Bakugo's explosive temper. The drawing of All Might on the cover was warped, the hero's signature smile twisted into a pained grimace by the heat. It had been hours since his encounter on the rooftop. Hours since the sludge villain, hours since Bakugo's rescue. Hours since the pro-heroes had praised Katsuki's bravery while scolding him for his recklessness. And hours since the words that had finally, definitively, hollowed him out. It's not bad to dream. But you also have to consider what's realistic. All Might's voice, the voice that had been his beacon, his North Star, echoed in his mind not with booming inspiration, but with the quiet finality of a closing coffin lid. He had asked the question he'd been terrified to ask his entire life. And the universe, in the form of his greatest idol, had given him the answer he always knew was waiting. No. A tear, hot and thick with grief, escaped his eye and traced a path through the grime on his cheek. It dripped onto the notebook's cover, smearing the ink of his own name. He slowly opened it, his fingers tracing the water-damaged, heat-warped pages. All his work, all his analysis, his theories, his desperate, pathetic attempts to bridge the chasm between his quirkless reality and his impossible dream. It was all just paper. Ash. He'd come here to be alone. He couldn't go home. He couldn't face his mother's hopeful, worried eyes. He couldn't bear to see the sympathy he knew would be there, the gentle pity that always felt worse than Bakugo's open scorn. Here, among the forgotten and the broken, he felt a kinship. He was just another piece of trash. His purpose expired, his function obsolete. It's over, he whispered to the rhythmic crash of the waves. The sound was hypnotic, a constant, uncaring sigh from the planet itself. It's really over. He hugged the notebook to his chest, a final, painful embrace for a friend who had just died. He was 14 years old, and his life had just ended. He would go on, of course. He would finish middle school, go to high school, get some boring, safe job. He would become a ghost in his own skin, a quiet monument to a boy who had dared to dream too big. The thought was so bleak, so utterly devoid of light, that it felt like drowning. He tilted his head back, his gaze listless as it scanned the stardusted canvas of the night sky. A part of him, the foolish, childish part he was trying so hard to kill, half expected to see a shooting star, to make one last desperate wish. As if on cue, a light appeared. It was brighter than any star, a piercing silver needle stitching a line across the black velvet. But it wasn't a meteor. Meteors were fleeting, a quick, fiery death. This light was resolute. It burned with a cold, pure intensity, and it wasn't falling in an arc. It was descending. It corrected its course, a slight, impossible jink to the left, as if it had a destination in mind, as if it was aiming for him. Izuku sat bolt upright, the lethargy evaporating in a spike of adrenaline and sheer confusion. His analytical mind, the one thing he'd always been proud of, kicked into gear despite the grief. Too slow for a meteor, too bright for a satellite reentry. No sound. The light isn't from combustion, it's inherent. What is it? The light grew, resolving from a point into a streak, a shimmering, silver tear in the fabric of the night. It hurtled towards the ocean, and for the first time, he heard it. Not a roar of friction, but a low, mournful hum, like a tuning fork resonating with the grief of the cosmos. It struck the water a few hundred meters from the shore. There was no explosive splash, no fiery detonation. Instead, the ocean seemed to part around it with a deafening hiss, a sound like a world-sized blacksmith plunging white-hot steel into the sea. A column of steam, thick and white, erupted towards the moon, momentarily eclipsing it. The shockwave that followed wasn't one of sound, but of pressure. It flattened the tall grasses on the dunes and rattled the junk piles, a silent, powerful shove that nearly knocked Izuku from his perch. For a moment, he was frozen. His mind raced through possibilities. A secret government weapon? A villain with a new kind of quirk? An advanced piece of support tech gone haywire? Then, a thought cut through the analytical noise, a simple, powerful imperative that was etched into the very core of his being. Someone might be hurt. His dream was dead. His future was a gray, empty hallway. He was useless, quirkless, a nobody. But his legs didn't know that. He scrambled off the car hood, his worn red sneakers slipping on loose gravel. He ran, not with the practiced grace of a hero, but with the frantic, clumsy desperation of a boy who couldn't stop himself. He dodged rusted rebar, leaped over tangled nests of cables, and scrambled up a small dune of compacted trash to get a better view. The steam was beginning to dissipate. The waves, once agitated, were calming. And there, at the edge of the surf where the water lapped gently at the shore, was the source. It wasn't a ship or a machine, it was a man, or something like a man. He was kneeling in the shallow water, his body impossibly sleek, impossibly silver. The moonlight seemed to cling to his form, which shimmered and flowed like liquid mercury. Even from a distance, Izuku could see that something was terribly wrong. Patches of the silver sheen were flaking away, like old chrome, revealing a pale, humanoid skin underneath. The being was clutching its chest, head bowed in exhaustion or agony, and next to him, half buried in the wet sand, were the pieces of what looked like a surfboard, shattered like porcelain. The fragments pulsed with a faint, dying light, the same cold, silver luminescence that had lit up the sky. Izuku's breath hitched. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. This was not a quirk. This was alien. His fear screamed at him to run, to hide, to call the police, to call a hero. But the figure in the water looked so utterly alone, so defeated. The heroic instinct, the one part of him that had refused to die on that rooftop, pushed him forward. He slid down the dune and began to walk, then jog, through the ankle-deep water towards the stranger. Hello? He called out, his voice trembling, sounding pathetically small against the vastness of the ocean. Are you okay? Do you need help? The silver being didn't look up, but Izuku felt a sudden, strange pressure in his mind, like a voice trying to form just behind his thoughts. So tired, the words weren't spoken. They were felt. They bloomed in Izuku's consciousness, filled with a weariness so profound it felt ancient, as if it had been gathered across millennia and light years. Izuku stopped, his sneakers sinking into the wet sand. He was now close enough to see the being's face as it slowly lifted its head. It was a face of noble, classical beauty, but it was etched with a pain that transcended the physical. The eyes, solid silver orbs without pupils, held the reflection of a billion dying stars. They fixed on Izuku, and the mental voice came again, clearer this time, resonating in his skull. You, child of this world, you must flee. It comes. It? Izuku stammered, his mind struggling to keep up. What comes? Who are you? The being tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled and gave way. He slumped back into the water with a soft splash. My name is Norin Rad, and I have led a devourer to your doorstep. For that my spirit will know no peace. The mental voice was laced with a deep, bottomless guilt. It hunts the power I carry. A hunger, an endless, psychic void that consumes energy. The null swarm. It followed me across galaxies. I thought I had lost it in the Magellanic Cloud, but it is relentless. Izuku's brain, a library of quirk data and hero tactics, had no file for this. Null swarm. Galaxies. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, the scale of his world, his city, his country, his planet, suddenly shrinking to the size of a single grain of sand on this beach. I can call for help, Izuku said, fumbling for his phone, his hands shaking too badly to get a grip. All might, he can. No hero of this world can face it, Unauthorized projected, the thought sharp with finality. Their power is a candle against a hurricane. The swarm will drain it, and them, and this entire planet dry. My presence here has doomed you all. He coughed, a racking, soundless spasm, and more of the silver coating on his skin seemed to dissolve into the water. My board, my vessel, it was my shield, my focus. It shattered entering your atmosphere. Without it, I can no longer contain the power cosmic. The power cosmic? Izuku whispered the words, the phrase feeling impossibly large in his mouth. The energy of creation itself. A gift from a master I no longer serve. It is a torrent of cosmic force, and I am the dam that holds it back. But the dam is breaking. Norin looked down at his own hands, which were now glowing with an unstable, flickering light. When I perish, the power within me will be unleashed. It will not be a simple explosion, it will unmake the very matter of this world, a chain reaction that will scour this solar system clean. There is only one way to prevent it. He looked back at Izuku, his silver eyes filled with a desperate, terrifying urgency. It must be passed to a new host. A worthy vessel to contain the storm. Izuku stared, speechless. Host? Vessel? This was insane. This had to be a dream, a grief-induced hallucination on a trash-filled beach. He was a quirkless kid, mourning the death of a fantasy. He was not a candidate for whatever this was. Me? The word escaped his lips, a squeak of disbelief. No, you don't understand. I'm nobody. I'm quirkless. I have no power. I can't even be a hero. I'm not worthy. The last word was choked with the fresh, raw pain of his own inadequacy. Norinrad's silver eyes seemed to soften. For a long moment, he was silent. Izuku felt a gentle, probing presence touch his mind. It wasn't invasive or violent. It was like the light of a distant star finally reaching him. He felt seen. He felt the alien mind sift through his memories, his emotions, his very soul. It saw the years of being called Deku, the useless one. It saw the pity in his mother's eyes, the scorn in Bakugo's, the dismissiveness of his teachers. It saw every sneer, every shove, every lonely lunch hour spent scribbling in his notebooks. But it saw more. It saw him, a small child, rushing to defend another kid from Bakugo, even though he was terrified and shaking. It saw him meticulously studying heroes, not for fame or glory, but to understand how they saved people. It saw the moment, just hours ago, when his useless, quirkless legs had moved on their own, rushing towards the sludge villain to try and save the very boy who had tormented him his entire life. The presence in his mind didn't feel his weakness or his fear. It felt the bedrock beneath it. It touched an ocean of empathy so vast it could drown galaxies. It found a resolve, a will to protect others, that was not born of power but of compassion. It found a soul that had been chipped, beaten, and abraded for 14 years, but had never once fractured. It had only grown stronger, more compassionate, more heroic in its powerlessness. The mental voice returned, and this time, it was filled with a profound, soul-shaking awe. You are wrong, child. You believe power makes a hero. A lifetime I have spent traversing the cosmos, seeing beings who could shatter worlds with a thought. They were not heroes. I have seen empires built on strength, ruled by fear. I see now, at the end of my journey, the truth I long suspected. Norinrad used the last of his strength to push himself forward, dragging himself out of the surf and onto the wet sand, closer to Izuku. A hero is not the one who can lift a mountain. A hero is the one who will try to lift it, even if they know they can't, because someone is trapped beneath. A hero is defined not by their capacity for power, but by their capacity for self-sacrifice. The silver eyes seemed to glow with a newfound clarity. I have searched for a successor, a being of pure intent, free from the temptations of ego and conquest. I see now my search was flawed. I was looking for the strongest. I should have been looking for the kindest. He reached out a trembling, silver hand. You do not need a gift to be a hero, Izuku Midoriya. You already are one. This is merely a tool for the hero who already exists. Izuku was crying again, but these were not tears of grief. They were tears of shock, of validation, of a hope he thought had been murdered being resurrected in the most impossible way imaginable. Everything he had ever been, everything he had been mocked for, his over-emotional nature, his obsessive analysis, his reckless empathy, this being from another world was telling him that those were not weaknesses. They were his strength. They were what made him worthy. But I'm just. His protests were weak, dying breaths of his old self. The vessel is not the strength. The spirit is. Norenrad's voice was fading, his physical form growing translucent. There is no more time. The hunter is close. And my body is failing. Please, allow my end to be a salvation, not a destruction. Take this burden. Wield it in service, not in conquest. Be the hero you were born to be. Izuku looked at the outstretched hand, then at the being's face, seeing not an alien, but a dying man pleading for his last act to have meaning. His own dream had died tonight, but here, he was being offered the chance to save an entire world. There was no choice. There never was for him. He nodded, a single, jerky motion. He took a hesitant step forward, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Norenrad smiled, a faint, peaceful expression. He didn't take Izuku's hand. Instead, he gently placed his palm on Izuku's forehead. The world vanished. There was no sound, no light, no sensation. There was only everything. Izuku's consciousness was ripped from his body and flung across the infinite tapestry of space-time. He witnessed the birth of a galaxy, a silent, slow-motion explosion of color and gravity that painted the void with nebulae. He felt the crushing pressure at the heart of a sun and the absolute zero of interstellar space simultaneously. He heard the psychic screams of a species on a doomed world, a chorus of terror and loss that echoed across light years. He saw time itself as a river, flowing from a singular point of unbearable density and heat, branching into a billion possible futures. He felt the four fundamental forces of the universe not as concepts in a textbook, but as living, breathing extensions of his own awareness. He could feel the weak nuclear force governing the decay of an atom in his own body, the strong force binding the protons in the sand beneath his feet, the electromagnetic waves carrying radio signals across the city, and the gentle, persistent curve of gravity that the Earth exerted on the moon. It was a tidal wave of information, of experience, of pure, unfiltered reality. It was too much. His human mind, a tiny thimble trying to contain an ocean, began to crack under the strain. He felt his sense of self, Izuku Midoriya, 14, student, son, dissolving into the cosmic static. He was everything and nothing. And then, through the storm, a single, quiet thought, a final gift from Norenrad, an anchor. A memory of a small, green-haired boy in an all-might onesie, pointing at a computer screen with a blinding smile, declaring to his mother, "I want to be a hero who saves everyone with a smile." That image, that core desire, became his center. His identity coalesced around it, pulling his scattered consciousness back from the brink. The cosmic torrent didn't stop, but it now had a vessel to pour into, a core to orbit around. It settled, sinking into his bones, his blood, his very DNA, a universe of power contained within the frail form of a teenage boy. The transference was complete. When Izuku's awareness returned to Dagoba Beach, only a second had passed. Norenrad's hand was still on his forehead, but it was no longer solid. It was translucent, a phantom made of fading starlight. The last of his life force, his very essence, had been poured into the power cosmic, and into Izuku. Be well. The thought was a faint whisper, the last ember of a magnificent fire, and then he was gone. The silver form of the Silver Surfer dissolved into a million motes of light, each a tiny star that hung in the air for a moment before winking out, one by one. A gentle sea breeze swept across the beach, carrying the last of him away into the night. He had left nothing behind but silence, the shattered remains of his board, and a quirkless boy who now contained the power of creation in his soul. Izuku stumbled back, his legs like jelly. He fell, landing hard in the wet sand. His entire body was thrumming, a low-level vibration that made his teeth ache. He looked down at his hands. They were glowing with a soft, silvery light, and tiny arcs of white energy, like miniature lightning, crackled between his fingers. He stared, his mind a complete blank. The grief, the despair, it was all gone, replaced by a profound, terrifying awe. It was real. All of it. He pushed himself up, his limbs feeling strangely light. He felt powerful. Not just strong, like All Might. He felt connected to everything. He could feel the water seeping into the sand beneath him, the stress fractures in the metal junk piles 50 meters away, the slow, rhythmic beating of a sleeping bird's heart in a nest on the cliffs. His thoughts were a whirlwind. The power cosmic. He gave it to me. To save the world. A hysterical giggle escaped his lips. Me? Save the world? I couldn't even pass a hero exam. The thought was so absurd, so overwhelming, that a wave of panic washed over him. The energy in his hands flared brighter. He thought about getting away, about rising above this, and his feet lifted off the ground. He floated, 1 inch. Then 6. Then a full foot in the air. He hung there for a breath, suspended by a power he didn't understand and couldn't control, his eyes wide with terror and wonder. The panic intensified, his control shattered, and he dropped like a stone, landing in a heap with a startled yelp. He lay there, panting, the cold water seeping into his uniform. The silver glow slowly faded from his skin, the energy retreating deep within him, but he could still feel it there, a coiled star in the center of his being. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was quirkless. And he had just been given the power of a god by a dying alien on a junkyard beach. His dream of being a hero like All Might was dead. But as he stared up at the uncaring moon, feeling the hum of creation in his veins, he realized with a tremor of pure, unadulterated terror, that something far larger, far stranger, and far more terrifying had just been born in its place. What? He whispered to the silent, watching stars, his voice trembling. What just happened to me? The echoes of Nor and Rad's departure faded into the rhythmic sigh of the waves, leaving Izuku Midoriya alone in the chilling embrace of the night. He was sprawled in the wet sand, a puppet with its strings cut, his uniform soaked and his mind a screaming, silent void. The silver glow had receded from his skin, but the sensation remained. It was a low, resonant hum at the base of his skull, a thrumming in his marrow, a feeling like his entire nervous system had been rewired with filaments of starlight. He pushed himself onto his elbows, his muscles trembling not from cold, but from sheer sensory overload. The world was loud. Not just the sounds, but everything. The gentle lapping of the tide wasn't just water on sand. He could feel the immense, gravitational pull of the moon that dictated its every movement, a silent tugging on a planetary scale. He could see the faint heat signature of a stray cat skulking through the junk piles, a ghostly orange predator in a world of cool blues and purples. He could hear, with maddening clarity, the frantic, high-pitched chatter of a family of mice nesting inside a derelict television set 100 meters away. It was too much. A universe of data was pouring into his brain, a fire hose of input aimed at a delicate teacup. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He had to get home. He had to get to his room, to the familiar, to the safe. He scrambled to his feet, his legs unsteady. The simple act of standing was a monumental effort in coordination. He felt the subtle shift in air pressure around him, the minute vibrations in the earth from a subway train passing miles beneath the city, the electrostatic charge building in the clouds overhead. He was a tuning fork resonating with the symphony of the entire planet, and it was driving him insane. He started to walk, then stumbled into a lurching, uncoordinated run, away from the beach, away from the spot where his reality had been unmade and remade. Every step was a fresh assault. The crunch of gravel under his worn red sneakers was a gunshot. The hum of a distant street light was a deafening roar. He could hear conversations from inside the darkened houses he passed, snippets of arguments about bills, a mother singing a lullaby, the drone of a late-night talk show. He felt the collective weight of their lives, their anxieties, their small joys, pressing in on him. He clapped his hands over his ears, a futile gesture. The sounds weren't just entering through his eardrums. They were blooming directly in his consciousness, bypassing the normal channels of perception. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the visual noise remained, the spectral glow of the power lines above, the infrared bloom of sewer grates, the faint, shimmering auras of life that clung to every tree and blade of grass. Focus, a voice in his head commanded. It was his own, but it was overlaid with a strange, calm resonance, an echo of Unauthorized's cosmic serenity. Filter. You are the vessel, not the victim. You control the flow. He stumbled to a stop, leaning against a cold concrete wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Filter. How? How did you filter reality? He concentrated, not on blocking things out, but on one single thing, the feeling of the rough concrete against his back. He focused on its texture, its temperature, the way it grounded him. Slowly, painfully, the cacophony began to recede. The distant conversations faded into a background murmur. The spectral lights dimmed, retreating to the edge of his vision. The planetary vibrations softened into a gentle hum. He wasn't blocking the input, he realized. He was simply choosing not to listen. He was turning down the volume on the universe. Breathing a sigh of relief, he opened his eyes. The world looked normal again. Mostly. There was still a faint, silvery shimmer to the edges of things, a heightened clarity that made the cracks in the sidewalk look like canyons, but it was manageable. He took a tentative step, then another. The journey home, which should have taken 10 minutes, felt like an odyssey. By the time he reached the familiar door of his apartment, he was physically and mentally exhausted, drained in a way he had never imagined possible. He slipped inside as quietly as he could. The lights were off. His mother was asleep. The thought of facing her, of trying to explain the impossible, was more terrifying than the sensory overload. He tiptoed to his room, the familiar squeak of a floorboard under his foot sounding like a thunderclap in his heightened state. He closed his door, the soft click of the latch echoing in the silent apartment, and finally allowed himself to collapse onto his bed, the all-might-themed comforter a surreal anchor to a life that no longer felt like his own. For a long time, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling, which was plastered with more glow-in-the-dark stars than there were real ones in the city sky. The power cosmic churned within him, a silent, sleeping giant. He was no longer just a Zucca Midoriya. He was a container for something vast and incomprehensible. His analytical mind, his one true refuge, finally clawed its way through the fog of shock and fear. He couldn't just lie here. He had to understand. He had to quantify this, categorize it, even if it was impossible. He slid off his bed and went to his desk. His burnt notebook, number 13, lay there, a testament to his failure. He picked it up, his fingers tracing the scorched cover, and for a moment, the rooftop despair threatened to return. But it felt distant now, an emotion from another lifetime. He set it aside gently and pulled a fresh, clean notebook from a drawer. He opened it to the first page and picked up a pen, the plastic cool against his fingers. He stared at the blank page, the pen hovering. How do you begin to analyze omnipotence? He decided to start with what he knew. He wrote a heading in his neat, slightly shaky handwriting, Power Analysis, the Cosmic Anomaly. He drew a line. Underneath, he started a list. Source, extraterrestrial. Bestowed by a being named Unauthorized. Nature, non-biological. Not a quirk. Does not appear to be affected by standard quirk mechanics, speculation, immune to erasure? Abilities observed, uncontrolled. Flight/levitation, brief, involuntary. Enhanced senses, auditory, visual. Others? Overwhelming without focus. Energy discharge, minor, from hands. Cosmic awareness, experiential knowledge of universal constants, time, space. He paused, tapping the pen against the paper. The list felt woefully inadequate, like trying to describe the ocean by listing the chemical properties of a single drop of water. The core of the power, the part Unauthorized had mentioned, was missing. Manipulation of fundamental forces. What did that even mean? He thought about the concept of strength. Not just physical strength, like All Might's, but fundamental strength. The integrity of an object. The forces that bind molecules together. As he scribbled the word durability on the page, he felt a strange resonance through his desk chair. He glanced down. The wooden floor beneath his feet, the same worn, scuffed planks he'd stared at his whole life, seemed different. It looked the same, but it felt different. Harder. Denser. He leaned down and cautiously tapped it with his knuckle. Instead of the familiar soft thud of wood, his rap produced a sharp, clear tink, like he was tapping on ceramic. He pressed harder, putting his weight on his fingers. The wood didn't give. It felt as solid as steel. No, harder. He thought of the strongest substance he knew. Diamond. The floor beneath him now felt as unyielding as a solid plate of diamond. His blood ran cold. He hadn't tried to do that. He had just thought about it. The power wasn't responding to his commands, it was responding to his thoughts. His idle musings had altered the molecular structure of the floor in his bedroom. A wave of nausea washed over him. What if he thought about something else? What if he thought about air turning to poison? Or gravity reversing? He looked around his room, his sanctuary, now a potential minefield of his own subconscious. His gaze fell on his favorite all-might lamp on his bedside table, a small, stylized figurine of the hero in his prime, fist raised triumphantly. The bulb was dim, a soft night light. He stared at it, thinking about light. Not just the light from the bulb, but the concept of light itself. Photons. Energy. The brilliant, searing heart of a star. The lamp flickered. Then it flared. The small bulb erupted with a light so intense, so pure, it was like a miniature sun had been born in his room. It wasn't just bright. It was a physical presence, a wave of heat and pressure that made the air shimmer. The shadows in his room were not just banished, they were annihilated. The plastic of the lamp began to melt, the colors running like wax as the figurine slumped under the impossible heat. No, no, stop! He yelped, scrambling back and knocking over his chair. He squeezed his eyes shut, throwing an arm over his face as he thought, desperately, normal. Dim. Off. The light vanished as quickly as it had appeared, plunging the room back into semi-darkness. The smell of ozone and burnt plastic hung heavy in the air. Izuku, breathing heavily, cracked his eyes open. The lamp was a ruined, molten wreck. The All Might figure was a barely recognizable lump. A thin curl of smoke rose from the blackened plastic. He had almost set his apartment on fire with a stray thought. The true, terrifying nature of his situation crashed down on him. This wasn't a power he could train at a gym. This wasn't a matter of learning to punch harder or run faster. His very mind was now a weapon of mass destruction, and he had no idea how to sheath it. He was a danger to his mother, asleep in the next room. He was a danger to everyone in the building, in the city. He couldn't do this alone. There was only one person in the world he could possibly talk to. One person who dealt with impossible power. One person who had looked him in the eye and told him his dream was dead, but who, underneath it all, had the heart of a true hero. All Might. He didn't even bother changing out of his damp, sandy uniform. He snatched his new notebook, shoved his feet into his sneakers, and slipped out of the apartment, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He ran, not with the uncontrolled panic of before, but with a desperate, singular purpose. He had to find him. He didn't have Toshinori Yagi's phone number or address. He just had instinct. He ran towards the wealthier part of the city, where he knew All Might's agency, Might Tower, was located. He wouldn't be there now, not in his weakened form, but it was a start. As he ran, he forced his mind into a state of rigid focus, concentrating on the rhythm of his own footsteps, building a mental wall to hold the sensory flood at bay. He found him by sheer dumb luck. Or perhaps, the power cosmic had guided him. On a quiet, tree-lined street a few blocks from the glittering spire of Might Tower, he saw a familiar, skeletal figure walking slowly, a bag of groceries in his thin hand. Toshinori Yagi looked even smaller and more fragile under the orange glow of the streetlights, a ghost haunting the edges of his own legend. All Might! Izuku called out, his voice hoarse with desperation. Toshinori jumped, startled, and spun around. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly replaced by concern as he saw the state of the boy. Izuku's hair was a mess, his uniform was damp and sandy, and his eyes were wide with a terror that went far beyond teenage angst. This was not the same heartbroken but determined boy he had left on the rooftop. This was someone who looked like he'd seen the end of the world. Young Midoriya? What on earth are you doing out here? It's the middle of the night. Are you alright? Toshinori's voice was raspy, full of paternal worry. I need your help, Izuku gasped, skidding to a halt in front of him. Something happened. After after you left. Toshinori's face softened with a pang of guilt. He thought the boy's spirit had finally broken. Listen, my boy, about what I said. No, it's not that. You're not going to believe me. You're going to think I'm crazy, Izuku rambled, his words tumbling over each other. He gestured wildly with his hands. There was a star, but it wasn't a star, it was a man, a silver man, and he was dying. He came from space, and he said something was hunting him, a null swarm, and he had this power, the power cosmic, and he said it would destroy the planet if he died, so he had to give it to someone, and he chose me. He finally ran out of breath, standing there panting, staring at his idol with wild, pleading eyes. Toshinori Yagi stared back, his expression a mixture of profound confusion and deep-seated pity. He looked Izuku up and down, the frantic energy, the fantastical story. His first thought was that the boy had suffered a complete psychotic break. The shock of having his lifelong dream dismantled by his own hero had been too much. Young Midoriya. Izuku, he said, his voice gentle, as if speaking to a frightened animal. Let's find a place to sit down. You've had a very difficult day. Maybe you should go home and get some rest. You don't believe me? Izuku's voice cracked with despair. This was his last hope. If All Might didn't believe him, he was truly, utterly alone. I knew you wouldn't. But it's real. I can prove it. My boy, there's nothing to prove, Toshinori said, taking a step closer. You're not well. Let me help you. Look, Izuku said, his eyes darting around for something, anything. His gaze landed on the grocery bag in Toshinori's hand. A can of cheap, processed coffee had rolled to the top. That can! Give me that can! Toshinori hesitated, his concern deepening. What for? Please! With a heavy sigh, Toshinori reached into the bag and handed the tin-plated steel can to Izuku. It was cool and solid in the boy's trembling hands. Izuku held it out between them. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. He remembered the feeling of Nor and Rad's mind touching his. He remembered the vision of galaxies being born, of matter being forged in the heart of stars. He focused on the can, not as a single object, but as a lattice of iron, carbon, and tin atoms. He thought about its structure, its properties. And then, he pictured something else. A different metal. Denser. More noble. Purer. He imagined the atomic number changing. He imagined electrons shifting in their shells, protons and neutrons reconfiguring in the nucleus. He poured his will into the mundane object, following an instinct he didn't know he possessed. At first, nothing happened. Then, the can began to shimmer. Toshinori's eyes widened. The label on the can peeled away, turning to ash in midair. The metal beneath began to glow, first with a dull red heat, then with a brilliant white light. But there was no heat coming off it. Izuku's hands, holding the object, were completely unaffected. The can seemed to liquefy, its shape softening and flowing like mercury, the light so bright Toshinori had to shield his eyes. The light subsided. Izuku opened his eyes and held out his hand. Resting in his palm, where the cheap coffee can had been moments before, was a solid, impossibly smooth cylinder of gleaming, pure silver. It was heavier than the original can, its density completely changed. It reflected the streetlights with a flawless, mirror-like sheen. Toshinori Yagi, the symbol of peace, the wielder of One for All, a man who had fought villains who could level cities, took an involuntary step back. His jaw was slack, his blue eyes wide with an expression Izuku had never seen on him before, sheer, unadulterated shock. He slowly reached out a trembling finger and touched the silver cylinder. It was cool and solid. It was real. This is impossible, Toshinori whispered, his voice barely audible. Transmutation, on a molecular level, without an equivalent exchange, this isn't a quirk. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Izuku said, a note of hysterical relief in his voice. He called it the power cosmic. Toshinori stared from the silver in Izuku's hand to the boy's terrified face. Everything shifted in his mind. The boy wasn't crazy. He was telling the truth. An impossible, world-breaking truth. The implications crashed down on him, a tsunami of cosmic dread and responsibility. This boy, this quirkless, kind-hearted child, now wielded a power that dwarfed anything he had ever known. One for All was a stockpiling quirk, a legacy of power passed through generations. It was a torch. What Midoriya held was the furnace of creation itself. They stood there in the silence of the empty street for what felt like an eternity, the greatest hero on Earth and a boy who had just become something far more. The universe's most terrifying secret held between them. "Come with me," Toshinori said at last, his voice grim, his mind already racing. He dropped the grocery bag on the pavement, its contents forgotten. "We need to go somewhere secure. Now." He led Izuku through a labyrinth of back alleys to a discreet, unmarked door that opened into a private underground garage. He drove them in a nondescript black car to a location Izuku didn't recognize, a featureless, windowless building on the industrial outskirts of the city. It was a secret bunker, a relic of a more paranoid age, one of All Might's personal safe houses. Inside, under the stark fluorescent lights of a Spartan living area, Izuku finally told him everything. He spoke of the falling star, of Norenrad's pain and his warning about the null swarm. He described the transference, the feeling of his consciousness dissolving into the cosmos. He explained the sensory overload, the incident with the floor and the lamp. Toshinori listened, his expression growing more grave with every word. He didn't interrupt. He simply absorbed the impossible narrative, the weight of it all settling onto his already burdened shoulders. When Izuku finished, the silence in the bunker was heavy and absolute. "A power that responds to thought," Toshinori mused, pacing the concrete floor. "A power that can rewrite matter. A power that comes with the knowledge of the universe and a warning of a predator that consumes worlds." He stopped and looked at Izuku, his gaze intense. "Young Midoriya, do you have any idea what this means?" I think I'm a danger to everyone," Izuku whispered, looking down at his hands. "Yes," All Might agreed, his tone blunt. "You are. But you could also be their greatest protector. A power this absolute, it is not a tool for fighting villains in the street. It is a force of nature." He fell silent for a moment, his mind clearly working through 1,000 different scenarios. Izuku watched him, his hope and fear hanging on the hero's next words. He had been planning this for months, ever since he'd first seen the boy's spirit. The plan to pass on One for All. To train him, to mold him into the next symbol of peace. Now, that plan was utterly obsolete. "I had intended," Toshinori said slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision, "to offer you my power. My quirk, One for All." Izuku's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You what?" "It is a sacred torch, passed from one generation to the next. I saw in you the heart of a true hero, and I deemed you worthy of becoming my successor." He let out a long, weary sigh. "But now, that has changed." Izuku's heart plummeted. Of course. Why would he need a simple strength quirk when he had this? It was another rejection, another reminder of how different he now was. But Toshinori wasn't rejecting him. He was protecting him. To give you One for All now would be redundant, at best. At worst, catastrophic. Your body is already struggling to contain a power meant to forge stars. Adding another, completely different energy source, it could be like mixing fire and gunpowder. It could tear you apart from the inside out. "No, I cannot give you my quirk." He walked over and placed a thin, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. The contact was grounding. "My role in your life, however, has not changed. In fact, it has become more important than ever. I can no longer train you to be my successor, because you are destined for something far beyond that. But I can still be your teacher. I cannot teach you how to use this cosmic power, no one on this planet can. But I can teach you how to be a hero. I can help you forge a moral compass strong enough to guide an ocean of power. I can help you stay grounded, to remember the boy you are, even as you learn to wield the power of a god." He looked Izuku in the eye, and for the first time, Izuku saw not the invincible symbol of peace, but the dedicated, passionate heart of Toshinori Yagi. "My dream was to find a successor for my power. Now my mission is to be the guardian for yours. I will help you, young Midoriya. You are not alone in this." Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, tears of profound, overwhelming relief. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a freak. He was a boy with a mentor, a student with a teacher. He had an anchor in the cosmic storm. "Thank you," he choked out. "Thank you, All Might." Far away, in his own room, Katsuki Bakugo was seething. He paced his floor like a caged tiger, the events of the day replaying in his mind. The suffocating terror of the sludge villain, the humiliation of being rescued. And worst of all, the image of that useless, quirkless nobody, Deku, charging in with a pathetic school bag and a stupid, terrified look on his face. The pros had called him brave. His classmates were already whispering about his powerful quirk. But all Bakugo could feel was a bitter, burning rage. Rage at the villain, rage at himself for being caught, and a deep, irrational rage at Deku for having the audacity to try and save him. To look down on him. He slammed his fist against his wall, a small, controlled explosion popping from his palm, leaving a black scorch mark on the wallpaper. He needed to be stronger. He would get into UA, and he would climb to the top, leaving everyone, especially Deku, in his dust. He stalked over to his window, yanking the curtains aside to glare out at the night, as if he could intimidate the moon itself. His room faced the backyards of the neighboring apartment complex. The Midoriya's apartment was a few floors down and to the left, and that's when he saw him, Deku, standing in the middle of his small, neglected patch of a backyard. He was just standing there. In the dark. It was creepy. Bakugo sneered, about to turn away in disgust. But then, Deku's feet left the ground. There was no explosion. No gust of wind. No visible propulsion. One moment, his red sneakers were on the patchy grass, and the next, they were hovering a foot above it. He floated there, silent and still, his body bathed in the faint moonlight. He looked serene, tranquil, completely at odds with the sniveling, crying weakling Bakugo had known his entire life. It was wrong. It was utterly, fundamentally wrong. Bakugo understood power. Power was loud. It was explosive. It was All Might smashing through buildings. It was his own crackling explosions. It was a physical, tangible force. This was not that. This was quiet. This was effortless. This was alien. Deku slowly descended, his feet touching the ground with impossible softness. He didn't seem to notice he was being watched. He just stood there for another moment before turning and heading back inside. Bakugo stood frozen at his window long after Deku was gone. The rage that had been a bonfire in his chest was gone, replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. It was a knot of ice in his stomach, a prickling on the back of his neck. He had always been at the top, the strongest, the one with the best quirk. Deku was a pebble on the side of the road, but what he had just seen, that wasn't a pebble. It wasn't even on the same road. It was like looking up from the path and seeing a silent, impossible moon hanging where it shouldn't be. For the first time in his life, looking at Izuku Midoriya, Bakugo Katsuki felt not anger, not pity, not irritation or rivalry. He felt a sliver of genuine, unnerving fear. The 10 months leading up to the UA entrance exam were a crucible unlike any Izuku Midoriya could have imagined. His life, once a predictable cycle of school, bullying, and obsessive hero worship, was now a clandestine existence of cosmic proportions, split between two starkly different realities. By day, he was still Deku, the quiet, quirkless student navigating the final, tense months of Aldera Junior High. But in the early mornings, late nights, and every stolen moment in between, he was the sole student of All Might, training not his body, but his mind, in a desperate race to leash a universe of power before it consumed him. Their training ground was a place of stark, isolated beauty. UA's training ground Gamma, a massive, man-made canyon carved out of a remote mountain range, miles from any civilian population. Nizu, the principal of UA, had granted them access after a single, 5-hour meeting with the deeply unnerved Toshinori Yagi. The official story was a highly experimental quirk development program for a promising young candidate. The reality, known only to the three of them, was that they were trying to teach a fledgling god not to accidentally unmake the world. The initial sessions were exercises in pure terror. "All right, young Midoriya," Toshinori said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, rocky expanse. He stood a safe 200 meters away, looking frail and small against the towering canyon walls. In front of Izuku was a 10-ton block of reinforced concrete, a standard piece of training equipment for high-level strength quirks. The goal is simple. Focus your power. Project it. Try to push the block. It sounded simple. Izuku, his mind still tethered to years of analyzing physical-type heroes, fell back on instinct. He pictured All Might. He pictured a punch. He balled his hand into a fist, focused on the block, and thought, smash. He didn't project a beam of energy. He didn't create a telekinetic shove. For a fraction of a second, the space between his fist and the block simply warped. Then it detonated. A silent flash of silver light bleached the canyon of all color, followed a millisecond later by a deafening crack boom that was more shockwave than sound. The 10-ton block didn't just break. It ceased to exist, atomized into a cloud of superheated dust. The shockwave slammed into Izuku, throwing him backward a dozen feet, and continued on to hit the canyon walls, cracking the solid rock and sending a shower of pebbles down around a stunned All Might. Izuku lay on the ground, his ears ringing, the smell of ozone thick in his nostrils. "I'm sorry!" he gasped, scrambling up. "I'm so sorry! I thought about hitting it hard and—" "It's all right, my boy," Toshinori called out, his voice a little shaky as he brushed dust from his track suit. "No harm done. But do you see the problem? You are trying to use a scalpel as a sledgehammer. No, that's not right. You are trying to use the entire ocean to hammer a single nail." This became the pattern of their early days. Every attempt Izuku made to replicate the actions of a traditional hero ended in cataclysmic, uncontrolled bursts of power. He tried to lift a car hulk with his mind, and instead he accidentally warped the space beneath it, nearly folding the vehicle in on itself into a singularity of scrap metal. He tried to project a small, controlled energy beam, and instead unleashed a torrent of raw cosmic force that sliced the top off a nearby mesa with surgical, terrifying precision. His frustration mounted with each failure. He had the power to reshape reality, but he couldn't perform a single, simple heroic feat without causing immense collateral damage. "I don't understand," he said one evening, slumping to the ground in defeat as the dust settled from another accidental explosion. Unauthorized wielded this power. He flew on a board, he projected energy. How did he do it? How did he make it listen? Toshinori watched him, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps listening is the wrong word. You are trying to command it, to force it into a shape you recognize. But this power is not a tool you picked up. It is a part of you now. It is you. You do not command your own heart to beat. He stroked his chin, a thoughtful look in his sunken eyes. A former colleague, a hero with a powerful mental quirk, once told me that the only way to master an overwhelming power is not to fight it, but to understand its nature. To become quiet and let it speak to you. Speak to me? How? Meditation, my boy, Toshinori said. We have tried the physical approach. It is time to try the mental. And so, their training shifted. Izuku spent hours sitting cross-legged on the cold canyon floor, his eyes closed, All Might guiding him through breathing exercises. At first, it was impossible. The moment he closed his eyes, the sensory floodgates opened. He could hear the seismic stress in the tectonic plates deep beneath him, feel the solar winds buffeting the Earth's magnetosphere, sense the collective bioelectric hum of every living thing for miles. But slowly, guided by Toshinori's patient voice and his own desperate will, he learned to find the quiet center in the storm. He learned to filter, to focus, to let the universe of data wash over him without drowning him. And in that profound silence, something began to stir. It started as a faint resonance, a feeling of familiarity within the power cosmic. Then, one afternoon, as the sun warmed the red rock of the canyon, he felt it clearly. A presence. Not a ghost, not a voice, but a memory, an echo of consciousness left behind in the river of energy that now flowed through him. It was the residual sentience of Unauthorized. He didn't see a person. He saw a perspective. His consciousness was gently lifted from his body and shone the universe through the surfer's eyes. He saw not a collection of stars and planets, but a grand, intricate tapestry woven from 4 fundamental threads. He saw gravity, not as a force that pulled things down, but as the gentle, persistent curvature of spacetime itself, a soft, invisible blanket that dictated the dance of galaxies. He felt how it could be locally deepened to create immense weight, or flattened to create a state of perfect weightlessness. He saw electromagnetism, a crackling, vibrant web that connected everything. It was light, it was radiation, it was the energy that powered machines and the neural impulses in his own brain. He saw how its frequencies could be shifted, its waves solidified into hard-like constructs, its flow redirected to disable any technology. And he saw the two forces that lived within the heart of the atom itself. The strong nuclear force, the unbreakable bond that held matter together, an immense power that could be gently unlatched. And the weak nuclear force, the slow, inexorable engine of radioactive decay, the ticking clock of universal change. The vision was not a lecture. It was an infusion of pure understanding. A paradigm shift that completely rewrote his perception of his own power. He had been trying to create energy, to generate force from nothing. That was wrong. The energy was already there, in everything. The power cosmic was not a wellspring of new power. It was the master key, the conductor's baton, the ultimate control panel for all the power that already existed. Don't create a punch, the echo of Norin's understanding seemed to whisper. Tell gravity to do it for you. Don't shoot a laser. Command the light to become one. Don't break the atoms apart. Ask them to let go. When Izuku opened his eyes, the world looked different. The light was richer, the shadows deeper. He felt the subtle push and pull of the forces around him not as noise, but as a symphony. A profound calm had settled over him. He looked at his hands, no longer seeing them as potential bombs, but as instruments of infinite finesse. Tashinori, who had been watching him with a concerned expression, noticed the change instantly. The frantic, anxious energy that always clung to the boy was gone, replaced by a deep, unnerving stillness. Young Midoriya? Are you all right? Izuku nodded slowly, a small smile touching his lips. I think I understand now. He stood up, his movements fluid and certain. He turned to face a new target, a sophisticated training robot All Might had procured from UAE's development studio. Let's try again. As if on cue, the robot's optical sensors flickered from a calm blue to a violent red. A power surge, perhaps, or a glitch in its programming. Its multi-barreled cannons whirred to life, aiming directly at a very vulnerable-looking Tashinori Yagi. Get down! Tashinori yelled, his hero instincts screaming, but Izuku didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He simply raised a hand, palm open, towards the haywire machine. His first instinct, a faint echo of his old self, was to blast it into oblivion. He ignored it. Instead, he reached out with his senses, feeling the space around the robot, feeling the gentle, universal blanket of gravity. And with a simple act of will, he pulled on its threads. The air around the robot shimmered, distorting like a heat haze. The machine, which weighed several tons, suddenly seized up. Its advance stopped dead. The sound of groaning metal filled the canyon as its armored legs began to buckle, its joints screaming in protest under a force that wasn't pushing it down, but was emanating from its own core. It was as if the robot suddenly weighed 100 tons. It crashed to the ground, its chassis cracking, pinned by its own impossible mass. Tashinori stared, speechless. Izuku wasn't finished. The robot's cannon still twitched, trying to aim. He needed to disable it completely, but not destroy it. Don't break it. Unmake it. He focused on the robot's structure, seeing it not as a solid object but as a complex arrangement of steel, copper, silicon, and plastic. He reached out with his will, not with force, but with a gentle, persuasive touch to the strong nuclear force holding its molecules together. He didn't shatter the bonds, he simply asked them to release. The robot began to glow with a soft, internal white light. It didn't melt or explode. It dissolved. With a sound like sand pouring onto a silk sheet, its form lost cohesion. The flawless armor plating, the intricate wiring, the powerful servos, they all unwove, separating and settling into neat, distinct piles on the ground. A pile of shimmering steel dust. A pile of gleaming copper dust. A small mound of black plastic pellets. A heap of purified silicon. The entire process took less than 5 seconds. Where a deadly, haywire machine had stood, there was now only a collection of its raw, fundamental components, perfectly sorted and utterly inert. Silence reigned in the canyon, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Izuku lowered his hand, his breathing even, his heart calm. He had wielded a power that could erase a mountain and had used it with the precision of a watchmaker. He turned to look at All Might. The former #1 hero was pale, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from the neat piles of dust to the calm, centered boy standing before him. The pride in his eyes was mingled with a new, profound emotion. "All, my boy," Tashinori said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What have you become?" Izuku looked down at his own hands, a genuine, confident smile gracing his features for the first time in months. "I'm becoming a hero." The day of the UA entrance exam arrived on a crisp, clear morning. As Izuku stood before the towering gates of his dream school, surrounded by a throng of nervous, excited teenagers, he felt a strange sense of detachment. The other applicants were buzzing with energy, showing off their quirks, sizing each other up. Izuku simply stood there, a quiet island in a sea of adolescent bravado. His 10 months of training had not been about building muscle or increasing power. It had been a monastic journey into the nature of reality. His goal today was not to impress anyone. It was to save them. He spotted Bakugo in the crowd, crackles of smoke popping from his palms as he glared at everyone with his trademark disdain. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Bakugo's expression was one of contempt, but beneath it, Izuku sensed a flicker of the same unease he'd seen from his window that night months ago. Izuku simply gave a small, polite nod and turned away, leaving Bakugo fuming in his wake. The written exam was trivial. The power cosmic didn't just grant him control over physics. It gave him an eidetic memory and an intuitive grasp of complex patterns, making the advanced math and science questions feel like simple arithmetic. It was in the practical exam where the real test would lie. As President Mick's voice boomed over the massive cityscape of the exam site, explaining the robot villains and the point system, Izuku closed his eyes and expanded his senses. He could feel the electromagnetic signatures of every dormant robot in the sector, the faint vibrations of their internal mechanisms. He could feel the nervous, thumping heartbeats of every other applicant. He already had a complete, three-dimensional map of the entire battlefield in his mind. The gates opened. Gah! While everyone else hesitated for a moment before bursting into a mad dash, Izuku acted. He didn't run. He pushed gently against the gravitational field beneath his feet, and rose. Silently, effortlessly, he levitated 100 feet into the air, a move of such casual, silent grace that nearly everyone on the ground stopped and stared, their jaws agape. "Whoa, what kind of quirk is that? Is that guy flying?" From his vantage point, he saw the robots activating. He saw a group of one-pointers cornering a girl with purple hair. He didn't swoop down to punch them. He simply extended his hand. The ground beneath the robots turned to thick, viscous mud, their treads sinking and spinning uselessly. They were immobilized without a single scratch. He flew through the cityscape, a silent, silver-streaked guardian angel. His approach was utterly alien to the brawling, destructive chaos below. He saw a powerful-looking boy with engines in his calves about to be ambushed by a two-pointer. Izuku subtly altered the air density in front of the robot's laser cannon. The shot dissipated into harmless light a foot from the muzzle. The boy, Tenya Ida, didn't even notice the save, simply taking the opportunity to demolish the confused robot with a powerful kick. He saw Bakugo, a whirlwind of explosions and rage, blasting his way through a swarm of robots. A piece of a three-pointer, a jagged sheet of shrapnel, was sent flying towards a group of cowering examinees. Before it could reach them, Izuku created a small, shimmering disk of hard light in the air that caught the shrapnel with a soft tink. The disk then faded, dropping the metal harmlessly to the ground. He never once struck a robot. He disabled them. He transmuted their internal wiring to lead, causing them to power down instantly. He used localized magnetic pulses to short out their circuits. He turned the asphalt in front of them to sand, causing them to topple over. For every robot he neutralized, he performed 3 acts of rescue. He solidified the air into a ramp to help someone escape a collapsing building. He pulled a boy from the path of a falling wall with a gentle telekinetic grip. He transmuted a cloud of smoke and dust from an explosion into a harmless puff of pure oxygen and nitrogen. He was a ghost in the machine, a whisper on the wind, his heroism so subtle and efficient that most people didn't even realize he was the one responsible. Then came the roar. The ground shook as the zero-pointer, a mechanized titan that dwarfed the surrounding buildings, rose from the center of the city. Its shadow fell over the battlefield, a wave of pure intimidation. It's the zero-pointer. It's worth no points. Run! The stampede began immediately. Everyone fled, a tide of panic and self-preservation. It was in that moment that Izuku heard a small, pained cry. He looked down and saw her. A girl with a round, kind face, trapped under a slab of concrete, her leg pinned. It was the same girl he'd spoken to before the exam, Achiko Uraraka. The zero-pointer's massive foot, the size of a house, was rising, preparing to stomp down right where she lay. There was no hesitation. He shot towards her like a silver comet. But he wasn't aiming for the robot. He was aiming for the space in front of it. He landed softly between Uraraka and the mechanical behemoth, a small, solitary figure against an overwhelming foe. He didn't brace himself. He didn't power up. He simply raised his hand again. The zero-pointer's foot, descending with thousands of tons of force, stopped. It didn't slow down. It just stopped, a mere 10 feet from the ground, frozen in midair as if the universe's pause button had been pressed. The grinding of its internal motor strained against an immovable, invisible barrier. To the few who had stopped to watch, it was a sight that defied all logic and physics. Izuku turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on the slab of concrete pinning Uraraka. With a flick of his fingers, the concrete dissolved into a pile of fine gray sand, freeing her instantly. "Can you move?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Uraraka, wide-eyed with shock and awe, could only nod dumbly. "Good. Get back." He then turned his full attention back to the frozen titan. Punching it would be needlessly destructive. He had a better idea. It was time for his masterpiece. He reached out with his mind, and the zero-pointer began to deconstruct. It wasn't violent. It was precise. It was beautiful. Bolts and screws began to turn of their own accord, spinning out of their housings and arranging themselves into neat, floating piles in the air. Armor plates detached and drifted gently to the ground, stacking themselves like playing cards. Pistons slid from their cylinders, wires disconnected themselves from their ports, and entire limbs separated at the joints. The other applicants, and the teachers in the observation room, watched in stunned, absolute silence as the single greatest threat on the field was dismantled, piece by piece, like a child's toy being carefully put away. In less than a minute, the towering engine of destruction was reduced to a perfectly organized, multi-story mound of its component parts, harmless and still. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku floated down, landing next to the dumbfounded Uraraka. "Are you hurt?" She finally found her voice. How?" He just offered her a small, reassuring smile. "I'm glad you're okay." In the darkened observation room, the mood was one of utter disbelief. "Did you see that?" President Mike screeched, his voice for once devoid of its usual energy, replaced by pure shock. "That kid, Midoriya. He just took it apart. With his brain. His rescue point score is off the charts," another teacher murmured, staring at a monitor. "A record-breaking 120 rescue points. But, look at his villain's score." Everyone looked. A perfect, pristine 0. Izuku Midoriya had not gained a single point for destroying a robot. By the official rules, he should have failed. But no one in that room believed he had failed. They had just witnessed something that transcended their very understanding of what a quirk could be. One man sat in the back, away from the others, his face hidden by his capture weapon. Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, had not said a word. He had watched the entire exam with a deepening, analytical scowl. He replayed the footage of Midoriya on his private monitor, slowing it down, zooming in. He saw the flight, silent and without propulsion. He saw the transmutation of earth and metal. He saw the hard light constructs, and the manipulation of invisible forces. Most of all, he saw the final act, the gentle, orderly disassembly of the zero-pointer. There was no physical strain on the boy's face. No telltale energy signature that most emission-type quirks gave off. No sign of activation or deactivation. The power was just there. An extension of his will. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. He had dedicated his life to understanding, fighting, and neutralizing quirks. He knew their limits, their mechanics, their biological anchors. What he had just seen did not fit into any known category. It broke the laws of physics as he knew them. It obeyed no rules. He switched off his monitor. The image of the boy floating serenely amidst a disassembled Titan burned into his mind. The other teachers were still chattering, debating the semantics of the point system, trying to fit the square peg of Izuku Midoriya into the round hole of their curriculum. Aizawa knew they were asking the wrong questions. He stood up and walked towards the exit, his face a grim, unreadable mask. "This isn't a quirk," he said quietly, his voice a low rasp that cut through the noise, directed at the empty observation room and the universe at large. "Quirks have limits. They have costs. They are an evolution of the human body. That is something else. A reality bender." He paused at the door, a deep sense of unease settling in his gut. He had a new student coming to his class, one who had earned 0 combat points yet was undeniably the most powerful person on the field. The potential was staggering. And terrifying. "He's either going to be the greatest hero in history," Aizawa finished, his voice barely a whisper, "or the most dangerous person on the planet." The first day at Yui High School was supposed to be the culmination of a lifelong dream. For 14 years, Izuku Midoriya had imagined this moment, walking through the towering gates, wearing the crisp gray uniform, his heart alight with the promise of finally becoming a hero. The dream had, in the most impossible way, come true. He was here. He was a student in the hero course, but as he walked the hallowed halls, the reality of his situation was a cold, heavy cloak draped over the warmth of his achievement. The dream he was living was a fragile lie, a carefully constructed mask over a terrifying and isolating truth. To everyone else, he was Izuku Midoriya, the quiet, green-haired boy who had somehow manifested a monstrously powerful quirk just before the exam. To himself, he was an imposter. He was a container for a power that had no business existing within these walls, a power that viewed the very concept of quirks as a quaint biological footnote. His heightened senses, now a constant, low-level hum in the background of his perception, made the experience surreal. He didn't just see the polished floors and high ceilings. He felt the immense structural load of the building, the network of steel beams humming with tension. He didn't just hear the excited chatter of his new classmates. He heard the frantic, synchronous beating of 200 hearts in the auditorium, a low, pulsing rhythm of adolescent anxiety and ambition. He could feel the faint electromagnetic field generated by the school's security system, a shimmering, invisible web that he could dismantle with a thought. He felt like a giant crammed into a dollhouse, terrified that a single wrong move, a single stray thought, would bring the whole thing crashing down. He found his classroom, 1A. The door was colossal, designed, he assumed, to accommodate students with size-altering quirks. He took a deep breath, reinforcing the mental walls he and All Might had practiced building for months. He had to be normal. He had to be plausible. Inside, the classroom was already buzzing. He saw the intimidating, engine-legged boy from the exam, Tenya Ida, arguing with a familiar, explosive blonde. Bakugo. Of course, Izuku tried to slip in unnoticed, but it was too late. The girl with the kind, round face, Achiko Uraraka, spotted him. "Oh, it's you! The plain-looking boy," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. Izuku flinched at the description, though he knew it was accurate. "Wow, that punch at the exam was incredible! You sent that huge robot flying." Izuku's mind went blank. Punch? Oh. She must have been unconscious when he actually dealt with the zero-pointer. From her perspective, he had simply appeared, maybe punched the ground to free her, and then the robot was dealt with. It was a simpler, more heroic narrative than the truth. He latched onto it. Why yeah. Thanks. I'm Midoriya Izuku. It's, nice to meet you," he stammered, his old, nervous habits resurfacing. It was easier to act like the old Deku. Safer. "I'm Uraraka Achiko. And this is Ida Tenya." Ida, having abandoned his argument with Bakugo, marched over, his arm chopping the air with rigid precision. "Midoriya, I must commend you. While your act of destroying the zero-pointer was reckless, You correctly deduced the true nature of the exam. That rescue and heroic spirit held more weight than simple destruction. You are a more perceptive student than I. I was completely fooled. Izuku could only nod dumbly. Perceptive? Right. He hadn't deduced anything. He had just reacted to save someone. It was pure luck that the scoring system rewarded it. His first 5 minutes, and he was already neck-deep in misunderstandings and half-truths. His gaze drifted to Bakugo, who was glaring at him from across the room. It wasn't his usual look of arrogant dismissal. This was different. It was a sharp, analytical stare, full of suspicion and a venomous curiosity. Bakugo had seen more than the others. He had seen the quiet, impossible things. He knew something was wrong. Before the tension could escalate, a new figure appeared at the door, lying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag. If you're here to make friends, then you can pack up your bags. This is the hero course. The shuffling emergence of their homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa, sent a ripple of shock through the class. As the tired-looking man explained the grueling day ahead, starting with a quirk apprehension test, Izuku felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. This was it. The first real test of his control, under the watchful eye of a pro-hero whose entire specialty was analyzing and negating quirks. Midoriya, Aizawa said, his voice a bored monotone as he handed Izuku a softball. You got the highest score on the entrance exam. What was your farthest throw in junior high? At 46 meters. Izuku squeaked. Right. Now try it with your quirk. Aizawa's dark, tired eyes fixed on him. Do whatever you want, as long as you stay in the circle. Just hurry up. The entire class turned to watch him. He could feel their anticipation, their curiosity. He could feel Bakugo's burning, demanding glare. He walked to the circle, the ball feeling absurdly light in his hand. He remembered the last time he tried to use this power to punch something. The memory of the atomized concrete block and the deafening shockwaves sent a shiver down his spine. He couldn't do that. Not here. He took a deep breath and thought back to his training, to the echo of Norin Rad. Don't create force. Command it. He wound up his arm in a perfect imitation of a baseball pitcher, a motion he'd analyzed 1,000 times. But the power came from his mind. As his arm swung forward, he didn't just throw the ball. He reached out with his will and wrapped the fabric of spacetime around it. He calculated the perfect trajectory, the precise velocity needed to overcome Earth's gravitational pull. He didn't just throw it hard. He gave it a command, leave. The ball left his hand with a barely audible whump. There was no sonic boom, no visible trail of energy. It just vanished into the blue sky. It didn't arc. It flew in a dead straight line, accelerating as it went, until it was a speck, and then nothing. Aizawa held up the device in his hand, his expression unreadable. He turned it around to show the class. The screen displayed a single, sideways figure 8. Infinity. A wave of stunned silence, then an explosion of noise. Infinity? Seriously? What kind of quirk is that? Uraraka clapped her hands together. Awesome! That's amazing, Midoriya! Only 2 people were not cheering. Bakugo's face was a mask of thunderous disbelief and fury. And Aizawa. Aizawa was watching Izuku with an unnerving, predatory stillness. The teacher's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, Izuku saw the man's black hair float upwards, his eyes glowing a faint red. It was erasure. Izuku felt absolutely nothing. The hum of the power cosmic in his soul didn't even flicker. It was as alien to Aizawa's quirk as a star is to a candle snuffer. It wasn't a biological function to be switched off. It was a fundamental constant of his new existence. Aizawa's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, the only sign of his profound shock. The floating hair fell. The glow faded. He had used his quirk, the ultimate anti-quirk tool, and it had failed. Utterly. He blinked, a slow, deliberate motion, his mind racing, recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his new student. A dangerous, unreadable expression settled on his face. Right, Aizawa said, his voice dangerously soft. Let's get the rest of these tests over with. Izuku knew, with chilling certainty, that he had just become the single most interesting, and suspicious, person in his teacher's life. Now, the goal wasn't just to control his power, it was to hide its true nature from a man whose entire career was built on unmasking powers. The rest of the tests became a delicate, nerve-wracking tightrope walk. For the 50-meter dash, he came in just behind Ida. He didn't use super speed. He simply manipulated the air currents in front of him, creating a vacuum that eliminated air resistance, while simultaneously creating a high-pressure zone behind him, giving him a gentle, constant push. To an observer, it just looked like he was an unnaturally efficient runner, his form perfect, not a single movement wasted. He finished in 3.05 seconds, blisteringly fast, but plausibly so. In the grip strength test, he took the device and gently squeezed. He didn't want to break it. Instead, he focused his will inward, reinforcing the molecular bonds of his own bones and muscle fibers. He made his hand, for a fraction of a second, the most durable object on the planet. The device's screen flashed an error message, its internal sensors unable to compute a number high enough, before it let out a groan of protesting metal and the handle crumpled in his grip like tin foil. He dropped it with a mumbled apology. For the standing long jump, he cleared the sandpit entirely. He didn't jump. He created a small, localized anti-gravity field directly under his feet for precisely 1.2 seconds, allowing him to float gracefully across the distance before the field dissipated and he landed softly on the grass on the other side. Repeated side steps, sit-ups, seated toe touch, he performed them all with a quiet, eerie perfection. He wasn't even breathing hard. He was subtly editing his own biology, ensuring perfect oxygen flow, eliminating lactic acid buildup, and reinforcing his ligaments with each movement. He wasn't exercising. He was rewriting his own physical limitations on the fly. He tried his best to appear to be exerting himself, gritting his teeth, letting out small grunts. But he knew it was a poor performance. The sheer effortlessness of his feats was the most damning evidence against him. Quirks, even powerful ones, had a cost. They caused strain, fatigue, drawbacks. Izuku had none. He was a walking, breathing violation of the laws of thermodynamics. When the final scores were displayed, his name was at the top of the list, just above a girl named Yayorozu Momo and a boy named Todoroki Shoto. He felt no pride, only the cold sweat of a lie successfully told. But for how long? As the class was dismissed to change, a hand clamped down on his shoulder, gripping him with explosive heat. Deku. Bakugo's voice was a low growl, more dangerous than any shout. He spun Izuku around and slammed him against the wall of the school building, away from the prying eyes of the other students. Bakugo's red eyes were blazing, but not with simple anger. There was a frantic, desperate confusion in them. "Don't you lie to me!" Bakugo snarled, his face inches from Izuku's. "Don't you feed me some bullshit story about a quirk you got from eating a piece of hair. I saw you months ago. In your backyard." Izuku's blood ran cold. "You were floating," Bakugo continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, threatening whisper. "There was no noise. No light. No sign that you were even trying. It was like you were breathing, and just now. That ball. That wasn't power. Power is loud. Power is messy. It leaves scorch marks and craters. You just told it to go away. It's wrong. It's not a quirk." He was smarter than Izuku had given him credit for. Bakugo's entire worldview was built on a tangible, violent understanding of power. What Izuku did, what he was, didn't fit. It was an anomaly that his rival's mind couldn't process, and it was driving him mad. "What are you?" Bakugo demanded, his grip tightening. Small, hot pops of nitroglycerin flared against Izuku's uniform, not enough to burn, but enough to threaten. "You were a worthless, quirkless pebble my entire life. And now this? People don't just change. They don't just become that. So you're going to tell me what you are. Right now." Izuku stared into Bakugo's furious, frightened eyes. For a moment, he was tempted to tell him. The burden of the secret was immense. To share it with someone, even his tormentor, was a tempting relief. But he heard All Might's voice in his head, warning him of the panic, the danger, the way the world would react to a power that could unmake it. He remembered Norin Rad's warning of the hunter. This secret wasn't just his own. He had to stick to the lie. "It's my quirk, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice surprisingly steady. He met Bakugo's gaze without flinching. I call it energy manipulation. It's complicated. It's always been there, but I couldn't control it. It only fully manifested recently. It was a weak, flimsy story, and they both knew it. Bakugo's face twisted into a snarl of pure frustration. He knew it was a lie, but he had no way to prove it. He was confronted with an impossibility, and being told it was mundane. Liar! He spat, shoving Izuku hard against the wall before backing away. The raw hatred was gone, replaced by something colder, more obsessive. Fine. Keep your secrets, you damn nerd. I don't care what you are. If you're a god or a demon or some kind of alien freak. It doesn't matter. He pointed a trembling finger at Izuku, his eyes glowing with a renewed, fanatical fire. This changes nothing. I will still be number one. I will claw my way to the top, and I will stand above you. I'm not just going to beat you anymore. I'm going to figure you out. I'm going to surpass you. This is our new starting line, Deku. From now on, I'm watching every move you make. With that, Bakugo turned and stalked away, leaving Izuku leaning against the wall, his heart pounding. The rivalry between them had been a simple thing before, the powerful versus the powerless. Now, it had mutated into something far more complex and dangerous, the known versus the unknown. Bakugo wasn't just his rival anymore. He was his first, and most dedicated, investigator. The walk home was a quiet, surreal affair. The initial excitement of the first day had been curdled by the tension of the test, and the venom of his confrontation with Bakugo. He felt more alone than ever, a solitary star in a sky full of planets, close but fundamentally different. Midoriya! He turned to see Ida and Uraraka hurrying to catch up with him. Your performance today was truly astounding, Ida declared, his arm chopping the air as he walked. Your control over your quirk is magnificent. To achieve an infinite score and then perfectly moderate your output for the subsequent tests shows a level of mastery I can only aspire to. He's right. It was so cool, Uraraka added, her hands clasped behind her back as she bounced slightly with each step. My quirk, zero gravity, is way simpler. I just touch things and they float, but if I do it too much, I get super nauseous. She stuck out her tongue in mind being sick, a goofy gesture that made Izuku's lips twitch into a small smile. As she spoke, Izuku felt it. He focused his senses on her fingertips and perceived the subtle, complex ways she was manipulating the Higgs field on a quantum level, negating the mass of the objects she touched. It was an elegant, beautiful piece of biological engineering. He then shifted his focus to Ida and sensed the unique chemical reactions in his calves, the specialized organs that converted lipids into a powerful, explosive fuel for his engines. They saw their quirks as simple cause and effect. He saw the intricate, fundamental physics behind them. He understood their bodies better than they did. The thought was both fascinating and deeply isolating. Your quirk is amazing, Uraraka, he said, the compliment genuine. Being able to negate gravity is an incredible ability for rescue operations. Her face lit up. You think so? That's what I want to do. I want to be a hero to help my parents. They fell into easy conversation, talking about their motivations, their thoughts on the teachers, what lunch had been like at their old schools. For 15 glorious minutes, Izuku forgot about the power cosmic. He forgot about Norin Rad and the Null Swarm. He wasn't a cosmic entity in a teenage body. He was just a high school student walking home with his new friends. He laughed at Ida's overly formal way of describing his favorite foods and listened intently as Uraraka described her family's construction business. He felt normal. He felt happy, but the feeling was a fleeting wisp of fog. As they walked under a set of high-tension power lines, he felt the powerful river of alternating current flowing above them, a 60 Hz pulse that was as tangible to him as the pavement under his feet. He felt the solar wind, a stream of charged particles from the sun, washing over the Earth's magnetosphere miles above their heads. He felt the slow, inexorable crawl of the Pacific plate grinding against the Eurasian plate deep within the planet's crust. The cosmic hum was always there. A constant, silent reminder of what he was. He could pretend to be one of them. He could laugh at their jokes and share their path for a little while. But he was not walking the same journey. They were climbing a mountain. He was floating in the sky above it, looking down. As they reached his street and said their goodbyes, the feeling of loneliness returned, sharper now for the brief reprieve. He watched his new friends walk away, their cheerful chatter fading into the evening air. He had found a connection, but it felt like a connection between a ship and a lighthouse, close for a moment, but ultimately on separate courses. He was happy to have them, but their presence only highlighted the unbridgeable gulf that separated his reality from theirs. Far beyond the sky, beyond the thin blue line of the atmosphere, in the cold, silent void where the sun's light was just a brilliant, distant diamond, something stirred. It was a sliver of darkness against the black, a needle-thin construct of an unknown, crystalline alloy, tumbling silently through the outer edges of the solar system. It had been drifting for centuries, a patient, dormant hunter, one of thousands cast out into the galactic wilderness. It was a probe, a sensory outpost for an entity whose hunger was matched only by its patience. For ages, its sophisticated sensors had tasted nothing but the faint radiation of the star, the gravitational whispers of the gas giants, and the cold, dead silence of the void. But now, it had detected something. A sudden, impossible spike of energy. It wasn't the chaotic burst of a star, nor the predictable energy of a planet's core. It was a signature so specific, so potent, it sent a jolt through the probe's dormant systems. The energy was complex, modulated, displaying the unmistakable signs of fine control and deliberate manipulation. It was the frequency of creation itself. The unique, undeniable signature of the power cosmic, the probe's internal mechanisms word to life. Lenses of exotic matter focused, and gravimetric sensors unfolded like black, metallic flowers. It triangulated the source with cold, unerring precision. It came not from the system's star, nor from the empty space between worlds. It originated from the third planet. A small, insignificant world of water, rock, and a thin, nitrogen-rich atmosphere. A world teeming with primitive, chaotic biological life. The probe drank in the data, its purpose fulfilled. The long hunt was over. The feast, which had escaped their grasp across a dozen star systems, had found a new host, a new hiding place. A single, tightly focused beam of tachyonic particles, a message that broke the laws of light speed, was projected from the probe, aimed at a point in the deep, interstellar dark from which it had come. The message contained only a single, complex packet of information, a set of coordinates, a measure of energy output, and a simple, final command: prey acquired. Consume. Far away, in the cold darkness between the stars, the great, silent swarm received the message. And in the black void, a billion hungry mouths turned their attention towards a small, blue-green light. A course was set.